On the podcast today, we are going to speak about why the self is an illusion, and we're going to speak about this through the mind science of Buddhism, which is one of the best systems to explain this and really explores it to its nth degree. And we'll explain that through the 5 aggregates of Buddhism, but we'll also explain it through the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism. So you'll have to watch all the way to the end to see the especially the 3 core components of the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism. And this will unpack whether your self is real, does it have a tangible essence, or is it something much different, which we'll explain today. So, first of all, well, last week's interesting because we spoke about the 5 patternings of consciousness within the Yoga Sutra, and now we have the 5 aggregates of Buddhism. And so what are the 5 aggregates of Buddhism? Well, basically, in Pali, they're called khandhas, and in Sanskrit, they're called skandhas. And they basically mean like a heap or a mass, rasi. So they mean this, right? So Buddha actually classified the constituents of the body, mind into 5 categories, which is what we know as the 5 aggregates of clinging, which is what these are. So we'll get into what those 5 aggregates are briefly. So we have first, we have form, which is rupa, and this is basically the physical component.
Yes.
And what about the second one?
Is feeling.
Feeling, yes. That's Vedana.
Vedana.
So that's what the affective tone of experience. So that's either pleasant, painful, and neutral. Vedana actually is important in Vipassana. So the practice of the awareness of sensations and feeling within the body.
Yeah, very important actually.
Yeah.
Very important, yeah.
And the third one is perception, sana in Pali, which is the identification of things through their distinctive marks and features. So that's pretty self-explanatory, right? The perceptual faculties that we have. And number 4?
For volition formations.
Which is basically samskara, right?
Yes.
In Pali, or samskaras, which we've discussed a lot on the podcast.
Yeah.
In Sanskrit, which is basically a term for the multifarious mental faculties involving volition, choice, and intention. So basically the storehouse or data bank or the subconscious, the subliminal mental imprints that we accumulate through our life, right? So, and then the 5th one is consciousness, vijnana in Pali, or vijnana in Sanskrit. Which is pretty self-explanatory. That's basically the cognition that arises through any of the 6 sense faculties: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And so those 5 make up, or what constitute the so-called self in Buddhism.
Yes.
So, and a lot of people will say, is Buddhism a nihilistic tradition? And when they say that, they hear the words of the Buddha, or they might read the Middle Way by Nagarjuna, the Madhyamaka, and they think that Buddhism just think that there's no self and this and that. And it's like, not technically. You're only saying that because you don't understand the 5 aggregates, and people will understand that more as we go on. So it is the 5 aggregates that constitute the self. So they build, and what happens here is they build this kind of illusion of this independent self.
Yeah, so the sense of identity.
Sense of identity.
Yeah, self as me, persona, more like.
Yes.
How we think that we exist independent of reality, of environment, or something like that.
Yeah. The separate, isolated sense of self, right?
Yeah.
There's me and there's the world. It's, as Buddhism teaches, like with dependent origination, is that nothing is kind of really independent of itself. Like everything is kind of leans up against something. And here they take that idea to a deeper level in talking about, like as you said, with the persona here, the self. So, and when we're saying self here, we're not meaning Atman in Vedanta. That's a completely different thing.
Self as me.
As me, yeah.
Idea of me,
as
I, like, different than others.
Exactly.
Like, separate from others, this sort of idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether there's an inner substantial essence, basically is what Buddhism is speaking about. Like, and this relates also to kind of the Christian notion of like the soul, right? So whether there is a soul in an individual, and Buddhism really pinpoints this idea of whether there's a soul, / persona that goes somewhere after death, so to speak. But we'll talk more about that because obviously we're going to lean into the samskaras and everything. But basically they are the building blocks to the 5 aggregates are the building blocks to build our sense of personal identity, which what you were alluding to.
Yes.
So they are the ultimate grounds of identification and appropriation. So they are what establish the selfhood, essentially.
Yes. Again, the word samskara, the mental imprints, here is kind of sums up all 5 aggregates, I think, because form, feeling, perception, volition, formations, and consciousness, all these 5 stays as a memory within us, and it creates its own kind of story and story, cycle, a pattern, whatever you want to call it, and that stream of consciousness.
Yes.
And that stream of consciousness as stays within our subconscious mind, which is samskaras, really, like mental imprints. And a lot of times those are dormant, so we're not consciously aware that we even have that memory, right? And whatever is happening in that present moment that triggers certain memories in the storehouse and down wherever you are and within yourself, so that it brings the same response to what you had in the past in a similar situation, and you start believing that is as me, like that. Like whatever situation present to you and you reacted in a certain way, I'm this kind of person. Like that sort of identity takes place kind of just immediately. Like there is no time, or you just why did I do that? Again, why did I do that? Like,
exactly.
Why did I react in that way? Why did I get angry?
Yes.
Like, so that we'd start to identify through that stream of consciousness, which is the samskara.
Yeah. So then, as we'll get into later, are we this I, or are we just identifying with the stream? And so we will get into that process. And so I should say, and we've kind of alluded to, in Buddhism there's there's a Sanskrit term anatman, which means essentially a self is empty, and which relates actually to the meontological perspective of Taoism as well, the perspective of nothingness within Taoism, and actually relates to Vedanta as well, because if you think about Atman is undifferentiated consciousness, which means it's kind of empty of qualities. If you look at Nirguna Brahman, it's qualityless, right? It's not Saguna Brahman with qualities. So Saguna Brahman would be like the soul, so to speak, like the self with qualities and so to speak, the world, basically. And so I just wanted to clear that up. So we'll move on. So basically, because of the 5 aggregates, the common belief in our world, as we've already mentioned, is that there's some sort of independent real self. We each and every one of us have an independent real self, an isolated, separate sense of self. And the Buddha challenged this view 2,500 years ago, and we're still challenging it to this day, and we haven't really bore the fruit of the Buddha's teachings.
It's very sad that I had a conversation between 2 scholars, and they were saying that in their study, and statistically, over 90% of the world population think very much like a Westernized way. So this independent self.
Yep.
No matter you're Asian or not, nowadays it's over 90%, which is a very, very dominant number.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Which is, I think it's actually...
And it's concerning a little bit because the cognitive style of the East and of places like South America and Africa are different to European people, right? So it's very concerning.
Very.
Not just European people, I should say, like North American and Australian, but like the origins of Western thought is in Europe, obviously. And so to have that idea of, especially of individualism in places such as Korea, which was once, the thing is that the cognitive style is still holistic, but the way of thinking is transferred over to individualism and this idea that everyone's a separate sense of self. Hence, can be a lot of confusion within. So, as you know, because you are Korean, and you're from there, and we've lived there, and you see the way people can be there, and there's a friction between the two cognitive styles. Like they have this rich heritage and culture bumping up against this, westernized, individualistic, and then they're off TikTok and then, so forth and so on. So, so the idea is that there is this independent sense of self with this substantial essence of a persona, right? So it's an independent entity. And actually all the Eastern spiritual traditions, they go into depth to debunk this illusion. Not just Buddhism. We're only explaining Buddhism here today for a specific reason, because especially because of the science of the Yogacara school. And we kind of come to this illusion because we live through the aggregates, right? And then we have this experience, a subjective experience of being a conscious agent every day. So once we have this experience of being a conscious agent, we start to believe then that we are this permanent soul or self that is going to live on, and we're going to, after death, we're going to be playing pool with Gandhi and George Washington and Martin Luther King, and we're going to be sipping tea and stuff like this. So we have all of these illusions that come from, again, the independent sense of self. Because see, you then are still going to live on after your life. You as yourself. I mean, Guyang's going to be chilling with. You're going to be chilling with your grandma and your great grandma, and this is all what's going to happen after your death, and so forth and so on.
That's common knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how we think of death and things like that as my life and my life after death and things like that.
And so Buddha is challenged in the idea of my life.
Yes.
This is my life. Well, let's unpack that.
Yep.
But because are you a product of just the five aggregates? Because the Buddhist belief that the self is only the constituents of the five aggregates. So that's what he wants to challenge. So basically the five aggregates develop this sense of self because they are built from a series of dependently arisen circumstances, right? So or events.
Yes.
So that's how the five aggregates develop the sense of self. So we have the five aggregates as a human, and we go through life and we experience the events, as you were mentioning too, about the cumulative sense of self. And then this creates this sense of persona.
Yes.
But we exclude that they're all dependently arisen set of events and circumstances.
100%.
That build your sense of self. That's why a lot of people, they throw off that phrase very casually, you are your environment. And from a Buddhist perspective, there's a lot of truth to that. You are your environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that when you change your environment, and that environment becomes part of you as well.
Exactly. And that's why when you also change your environment, you can feel uncomfortable in a new environment because you're used to the circumstances in the other environment. You don't have that variation that Lao Tzu was talking about, where you can just be like,
move through,
ride like the wind.
Yes.
You can't ride like the wind. So people have to realize that the self does exist in Buddhism, but as the aggregates.
Yes.
So it's not a nihilistic tradition. It's not like, it's not a fatalistic thing where, we just don't exist.
Yes.
Like, no, you exist.
Yes.
To a certain degree.
Yes.
But not as firmly and permanently as you think.
Yes. Again, the five aggregates constitutes the sense of self here. And that five aggregates, once you unpacked what they are, And again, all these 5 aggregates are purely response or the reaction of certain situation or events.
Yep.
So that reaction creates the idea of who you are.
Yes.
Yeah, so that, again, the feeling, form, perception, all these things that creates and sensations. The sensations create the thoughts, and the thought creates this thoughts after thoughts, and so that is building the sense of that independent self. So the independent self is actually not independent at all. Then
No.
you purely depend on that very situation or events.
Well, your sense of self is dependent. Your actual nature is shunyata, which we'll talk about, which is, so exactly. So your self exists because of, the causes and conditions that actually inform your existence, right?
Yes.
So everything you've experienced has built this sense of persona, and that's what you've accumulated through your whole life. And then you say I. But then you think back and you think, well, what about I at 19? Can I look at that I at 19 and I now is 41, and are we the same person? Completely different. Completely different. And psychologists talk about this a lot, and this and that, where even that it gets to the stage where we actually change day to day. And a lot of people actually don't want to believe that. And that's why there's a lot of research where people try to hold on to, say, their 18th sense of self. And when they're 60, psychologists say there's actually been a lot of psychological damage from trying to hold on to like a younger version of yourself. Because in some sense, and this actually supports the 5 aggregates, you haven't actually experienced life. You're holding on to a set of beliefs and probably where you were from a long, long time ago. But then you moved to Trinidad and Tobago, then you moved to France and then Kenya, and then you're still supposed to be this guy from Queensland in Australia. I mean, that means you would have went through your life like this and didn't see anything, didn't experience anything, right?
Yeah. Again, it's some reason people want to hold on to that 19-year-old point of view to the world, right? And as if people often think that changing your perception towards the world is like a somewhat negative thing, so that you just try to remain at that perception as a 19-year-old, and you keep that perception until you're 60. So you must have gone through a lot in life for if they're 40 years time, it's a long time, right? So natural progression, you're supposed to change.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
Other than 19-year-old, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if you were to still have the same perception and cling on to that same perception as a 19-year-old when you're 60, then definitely there's some sort of psychological problem going on. It has to be, right?
Yeah. Well, what's common in most cultures when you... And I've witnessed this in many different cultures, and you and I are pretty well traveled, is people will often say, he or she hasn't changed and it's great. Hasn't changed. And it's like, why is that great? I don't understand why that's great. And first of all, it's not a real accurate statement, because people say that usually because they may still like certain things. You know what I mean? They may still like a certain sporting team, or they may still act maybe a certain way. But in reality, they've changed actually quite substantially from, in a decade, for example.
And in that situation, whoever, the person who were praising the other person in that way, him or herself is resisting change.
They're resisting change themselves, yeah.
That's why they think growing up and being more mature and having a change in life is something like not very good. That's how they see it, so that they think not changing is a good thing. Yeah, because change frightens people. Change, and first of all, because change starts to tear down the artifice of your own persona. See,
when you start to change, and you actually, if you're a contemplative person, and you think deeply, you start to realize that maybe who I am is not really actually who I am. You know, I'm holding on to this sense of self.
Yes.
But change is changing me.
Yes.
So to speak.
Yes.
Because you are part of the dependently arisen world. Your sense of self is part of the world. It's not isolated and independent of the world. It's actually a process of the world, which we'll get into, but that's what we need to understand. So our sense of self exists to the degree that it's the 5 aggregates. So, you know, and we've been explaining it, but we got to explain more why the self is considered like this persistent illusion according to the Buddha, you know what I mean? First of all, we can, like if we look at the aggregates and we look at the teachings of the Buddha, the aggregates can be, in some sense, annihilated through the Eightfold Noble Path of Buddhism, right? So this brings each aggregate to an end. So you know, the medicine for this process is the Eightfold Noble Path. And most people are probably familiar with that, you know, the right speech, right action, right mindfulness, so forth and so on. And that brings that sense of that each aggregate, it you know, ends its process, so to speak. But that comes with intense sadhana, intense spiritual practice for that to happen. It's not something that you can just go, I'm just going to read the Nikayas and just...
I think it's just really lifelong process.
Yes.
There is no end destination to get to. Again, the practice itself being a process. It's a constant effort and constant study, I think.
Yes.
Once we found this knowledge and once we realize how much important it is for every one of us to get into, you need to just carry on for the rest of your life, basically. Exactly.
And that's why when monks and sadhus and so forth and so on, when they are entering Mahasamadhi, they're still practicing. You know, they're still upright in posture. They're dying, you know, like everyone knows that. But it's... even though they don't have the energy, they make sure the people around them put them into a lotus posture. And in some sense, as we know in South India especially, they will build a big chamber for but particularly a sadhu, and they will put them down there in a lotus posture, and then they'll cover the hole, and that's how they're going to enter that next stage, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So... you know, I mean, it's pretty, for other people, that's pretty hectic, right? Like they go, what, I'm going to end my life in darkness? Well, it's going dark.
It's a conscious dying process.
Conscious dying process, yeah. Dying consciously. Not just dying consciously like to you know, the death of your ego, actually physically as well. And so that's what a lot of monks and sadhus, like that sadhu tradition or yogic tradition in South India is, it's pretty eye-opening, you know what I mean? Like they dig a very deep chamber, like almost 5 meters deep, and then they put the ladder down, they put the person down there in a posture and, see bud, and just walk back up, cover it with like, you know, a stone or something like that, and then and that's it. And obviously they'll come back in a couple of days or a day or two and yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, it can be quite revealing, right? So.
Yeah, that is to overcome fear of death and fear of being complete alone in darkness.
And being committed to the practice, as you were mentioning.
Yes.
Being committed to practice. Not even in the most painful moment of their life, physically, I mean, the suffering that they're experiencing physically, still... make sure you put me down there. Make sure you follow what I'm saying. I don't need to see anyone else. You know, I've lived.
Actually, that's really inspiring.
Yeah.
Because that much you're committed. Your commitment is that strong, like
to the last minute.
Yeah.
To the last minute. So there is no independent sense of self or soul. Independent from the world that exists. That's what we've been trying to get across here from the 5 aggregates and what the Buddha teaches. And so, but the problem is people believe in this illusion, right, of this independent sense of self, hence conflict and everything arises. And so, and this all comes from because we believe we are this. We don't look at ourselves as part of the world, right? We see ourselves as separate from the world. The world's out here. We are here. We exist to get stuff from the outside world to nourish our existence, but we don't think of ourselves as actually part of this process. So we think we are this stationary phenomenon. This stationary phenomenon that's outside the scope of the world, that's different from the world in some sense. And our mentality is our own. Our psychology is our own. It's not the product of the aggregates. And so we think we're outside the field of change, the process of existence itself. But we are a process of change. And so, but then it makes us see what we do is we create all of these things about ourselves as we've talked about on the podcast so much. We create all of this conditioning that tries to solidify this independent sense of self, and then we can't sort of jump outside of that. We can't, we kind of imprison ourselves within the process of change, which doesn't give us then this fluidity with existence, where we can move, so to speak, with the Tao without being stuck anywhere. And so we suffer then.
Yeah, again, we create this, we solidify our identity through 5 aggregates. And we create this idea of who we are, who I am, right? Who I am, who you are. And that identity is so concrete. And we try to always stick to that identity, that who we think we are, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, when change is inevitable, let's say, for example, we've made this example so many times. We lived in yes, very developed. Everything is taken care of in the first world countries like Australia, America, Korea, anywhere, and then we get dropped into, let's say, Bangladesh or in Dhaka, swimming with the people, or in India, Calcutta.
Oh, yeah.
Get there 3 a.m. when there's nothing's open.
My bread and butter.
Then, if that's the situation, literally from like A to Z, basically, then you have to change. You have to learn to adapt.
You have to adapt,
right?
Yeah.
So then that identity that you've been actually possessed by for the entire your life, up until that time, you have to put that in the bin.
Yeah.
You have to change. Because everything operates differently in different world. And you have to be able to change. But again, like you mentioned, when that sort of change occur, we freak out. That's why we have so much anxiety. We don't know what to do, and and that's why that we become disabled to adapt to change.
Yes,
which is a big problem. Again, when that happens in psychologically, it has, as you mentioned earlier, we meet with a lot of conflict, argument, only because we are not able to change psychologically. And the psychological change is a big challenge. Why? We've been believing the sense of who we are under certain conditions. And the conditions is so hard and strong, while we don't even realize. It's always there dormant. And that has to change. That change comes with fear. Why? Because you need to deny that self was in the past. It's not you anymore, right?
It's not stationary. It's not permanent. And as you mentioned with India, if anyone wants to deprogram themselves, dropping yourself in somewhere like India will begin the deprogramming process pretty quick. I remember moving there when I was younger, and then layers of identity and personality just get stripped away. And it's a good thing. It's not like it's a bad thing. But what you notice is that, especially, for myself, and you experience this too as a Korean when you moved there, coming from Australia to move into India and living there and just, being absorbed in the culture and the teachings, is that you start to actually fight with yourself.
Yes.
Because there's a battle between what's actually happening and who you've been programmed to believe you were. But that program doesn't exist. The program only made sense in a certain culture and in a certain environment. But now what's being called upon you is change. Mm-hmm. And, when you're in somewhere like India, you feel the layers of persona and that peel away and fall away. And you and I are the fruit of living in those places. A lot of people say to me, as you know, because you hear this question a lot, is, how did I learn so much and this and that? Is it from being in great places? And basically, it was mainly from traveling, you know what I mean? And putting myself in a situation, and same with you, where we were outside the scope of our ordinary environment. And of course, we're learning the great traditions and stuff like that.
Yes. But experientially learning outside of lecture room, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, physical contact with a different culture.
Yeah, exactly.
First
engrossed in the culture, right? Like, not just hanging there, like where we are in it. And so that just peels the layers of persona away. And that happens to anyone. They actually can go anywhere and do that. So the thing is that, we invest a lot. We invest so much into this so-called sense of selfhood, right? The sense of Jason or Guyang or whoever's listening and watching. But then when change comes along, we have that sense of anxiety. As I said, when in India, and I'm like, you're in Varanasi and like just nothing works. Nothing works. So it doesn't matter what you want to try, nothing's going to work.
Yeah, everything goes wrong.
Everything goes wrong. And you've really got to then, be shanti and just, okay, like, I'm going to try this today, but it's highly likely that it's not going to work.
Yes.
But if you set out and you go gung-ho, like, I'm going to do this today, you're going to...
Remember that day we tried to hire a bicycle in Tiru?
Oh, my God, yeah.
That was really like, we set the goal. We're going to do this and we're going to ride around Arunachala. That's what we're going to do today. Oh, yeah, that plan didn't go.
Just as something as simple as going to hire a bike,
it didn't.
It turns into a Hollywood film very quick. A big debacle. So,
Yeah.
So the 5 aggregates are the self, as I keep mentioning here, yeah. But they're not an inner essence. They're, as we mentioned last week with the 5 patternings in yogic thought, they are kind of a functioning of the persona. They're the constituents of the constitution of a human being's psychosomatic organism.
Yes.
How we experience the world. And the problem is, but through those 5 aggregates, the unfortunate habit of building the illusion of a self can happen without any, because a lot of us don't have prior training.
No.
Our awareness has not been trained.
No.
And so in Eastern spirituality, as we know, we're constantly training the awareness, coming back and embodying as the awareness, because the awareness is separate. Separate's a bad word, right? But it's not part of the 5 aggregates. It can see the 5 aggregates as an object in and of themselves. So
there's a bit of gap.
There's a gap, right? The problem is when the awareness gets entangled with the aggregates, then we believe I am this separate sense of self, and I don't like what he or she said. And
that's when we start to have this a false sense of belief based on the 5 aggregates.
Exactly. And so the self, essentially, then, if we look at it from that perspective, is a process. And Evan Thompson mentions in Waking, Dreaming, Being, highly recommend anyone go out and read that book, this idea of I-in. So, it's a process, it's a happening, a constant happening, which is a borrowed concept from the Hindu ahamkara, which is I-making. So ahamkara is I-making, is the idea that we have this I that is constantly, it's just a process. So what we think of as ourselves is a process. So it's kind of mind-blowing, right?
It is mind-blowing that, like you said, 20 years ago I and now I is two completely different person. Actually, physically we're different too.
Yeah.
Like we just don't see it, but we do shed skin literally.
Yeah.
Like we physically go through. I mean, hair growing, nails growing. We chop them off, and physically we are also changing. So that biologically, psychologically, we are completely different people.
Yeah. I basically would be like this to my 19-year-old Jason. I'd be like, oh, is this guy serious? Like, he needs a few slaps around the ear hole, you know? Wake up to yourself.
Yeah.
So we are this process. And so that's really something that, you know, should really hit the nail on the head for a lot of people when they think about themselves. And this is why it's important to understand this in Eastern spirituality, this idea of I-making, this idea that your persona is an accumulative sense of self. It's a product of the world.
Yes.
It's not you, essentially. It's not the pure awareness. It's not the Atman or the Shunyata or the, you know, it's not any of that. It's not the Tao. It's an accumulation of the world that we exist in due to the 5 aggregates.
Yes.
Now we'll get into the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism because it's one of the best explanations of this process itself, of this I-making process. And the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism is, you know, a massive part of Mahayana philosophy, because around that time we have the Yogacara schools, with the Madhyamaka schools, with Nagarjuna. I mean, there's so many great schools. And so Yogacara is basically a mind science, and there's 3 core components that we have to talk about. So the first one is Alaya-vijnana. So Alaya-vijnana is basically the Samskaras, and Alaya-vijnana is the most, and as you were talking about before, is one of the most important, actually the most important thing to understand within this mind science, to understand the process of self. And so that's basically the subliminal repository of psychological propensities. So that's the storehouse consciousness.
Subconscious data bank.
The subconscious data bank.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is. It really is.
Just dormant data.
Yeah, dormant data, that we all have, right?
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. And we access that dormant data and then we think that that's who we are.
Yes.
The second one is Mano-vijnana. Now, Mano-vijnana is the attention to mental states. So it's basically just a mental consciousness. So the attention to mental states. And then there is manas. Manas is basically the pre-attentive awareness. So these 3 explain it beautifully, and we're going to unpack those. And first we'll start with Mano-vijnana. So Mano-vijnana is the mental consciousness that takes in, you know, the mental states as objects of attention. So
emotions, thoughts that arise.
Exactly. Yeah. It's pretty self-explanatory. So how we sort of emotionally relate to the world.
And when the emotions and thoughts arise, we instantly look at it.
Yeah.
And not only just looking at it, we follow that.
We follow that.
Right. Yeah. So it be completely kind of taking over your mind, basically, in that moment.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And then we have the manas. So manas is the pre-attentive mind, which provides the feeling of being a conscious subject. So it gives you the feeling of being the conscious subject.
Yes.
And this is actually where all the trouble begins, and which we will explain, because if you don't understand this Yogacara mind science, then the pre-attentive awareness can, as you said, can follow mental consciousness due to the stream of consciousness, the Alaya-vijnana, and then
you're daydreaming. You're gone.
You're gone, yeah. Then you believe in the process. You've bought the ticket to the process, and the film is just constant. This is not a premiere, like a movie premiere. This is like a live stream that's just ongoing, like a YouTube live stream, and you're just following.
Pretty much.
Following it, you know.
Yes. And
so the most important to know out of these 3, as I mentioned, is the Alaya-vijnana, which is basically the Samskaras as well, right? So this unpacks the whole self as the illusion. So this is as I mentioned and as Guy mentioned, is the storehouse consciousness that has, you know, all of the habits and propensities of an individual, habits, tendencies, the way we act.
Everything. Memories, it contains everything.
Everything. Yeah.
Because our subconsciousness field, it takes on everything.
Yes.
Like we might not remember what color of the car was at a certain moment consciously, but like when you do something completely different and ages later, all of a sudden you kind of remember it.
Yes.
Is all just everything. Everything that wipes you. So just the things that we've experienced through five senses, what we've seen, what we've smelled, right? What we've tasted, what we heard, everything. What we physically felt, everything.
Yeah.
Yes, and that again entangled with a certain circumstantial thing, whatever event that occurred to you, goes with the five senses. So that a certain person made you angry, and then your heart bumping. That we get into then the psychosomatic organism, then right? Like when we get angry, then like the heart rate goes up, then you start sweating, or all these kind of responses, and all that things are stored in the samskaras within ourselves.
And that anger is, you may experience something now, but that anger is from a past experience that's been stored in the aggregates, but it somewhat identifies with the present experience.
Yes.
And so then it overlays the anger onto that person.
Yeah, when you get angry and at that present moment, you are so angry without you even knowing it.
Yeah.
It's because that is subconscious.
Yes, that's right.
But then origin of anger could come from the past experience.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So, as you said, this is like a data bank of all experience, right? Like, so we have this bank, and we are not conscious of this stream.
Yes.
And so this is where the mind's cognitive error happens. And this is, as I said, with the pre-attentive mind. The pre-attentive mind is actually where all the trouble occurs. So, and what I mean by the mind's cognitive error is the pre-attentive mind identifies with the subconscious content. It identifies with the data bank. And then you have all sorts of problems, because the aggregates, as you were alluding to, is built on all experiences. It doesn't mean that all experiences are actually essentially, we had any sort of emotional relationship to it. You could have walked past a billboard the other day, and that left an impression, which is then going to evoke a certain response within the stream. It's going to produce a certain effect within the stream. And then the pre-attentive mind then follows that stream, and you go, wonder why I did that. You saw a billboard the other day. It was completely unrelated to you. But it recorded, and then you played out the film.
Yes.
So this is where all of the trouble begins. So, the pre-attentive mind, as I said, it identifies with the subconscious content, right? And then it designates this stream coming from the storehouse as our I or our ego.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and you identify yourself as that state of mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm like this. How you just get disappointed. Like I got triggered by that. I got angry. I'm such a useless person. Like. But
it's not who you are.
Yeah.
It's the stream.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
See, that's the funny thing, isn't it?
That's why that's why that awareness is so important. That it's I-making process. That is we are in a constant process, but we are not aware of that fact. Then we are solidifying who we are as emotions and thoughts and reactions and whatnot. And then you start judging yourself, and you're criticizing yourself, and all these trouble happens.
Exactly. See, when you just nut it down, that the stream is not who you are. The aggregates, the Samskaras, are just a storehouse. They're just a part of the process. A part of being a psychosomatic organism. It's part of the mind itself. But we're not told at 6, right? Hey, Guyang, be careful about your samskaras. You don't want to identify that with them. You've never heard this, right? You just go to school and you just barge your way through life, and then off you go. It's just like, you're given your bag and you go, get out there. And you've got no roadmap.
Be a good person and don't fight with your friends and all these things.
Yeah, generic things.
Yeah.
But not actually the knowledge as to how you won't fight with your friends, how you won't come in conflict, because then you can understand the stream of consciousness.
Exactly.
So the storehouse consciousness, the alay of vijnana, the samskaras, the subliminal data bank, is actually not an ego. We need to really try and reinforce that. It's constantly changing. It's not a substantial thing. Constantly changing. The stream is always changing. But we think it's a constant thing. As you said, we see that and we say, that's I. That's it.
Why did I do that
again? Again, You're a victim of the stream.
Yes.
Don't put your toe in the water.
Why did I? That I is not...
It's not,
Not that.
No. So, in understanding that, then we understand that then the self is a mental fabrication. It's not really, it's not a substantial thing. It's a mental fabrication. And that's why I say the self still exists according to Buddhism, but it's not how we kind of think of it stereotypically, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like you have a stationary, permanent sense of Guyang.
And I just wanted to re-mention this thing. I really like what you said, that this process, the mind's cognitive error, like we have a cold and hot cognition, and cold is making the rational decisions. Hot cognition is more so like emotional and the quick reaction.
Yes.
But I think somehow that, because we are so uneducated with such thing as pure awareness and Eightfold Path and this kind of Eastern tradition, the mind science, so that our core cognition are also somewhat dormant to make a distinction between what's real and what's not, right? When we observe ourselves, right? So that in that sense, like the process of studying the Eastern spiritual, the philosophy, mind science, is to kind of retrain our core cognition and educating our core cognition to prevent this to happen.
Yes.
To prevent this cognitive error to happen.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. 100%, because it's the cognitive error is only going to continue to cause you suffering and cause suffering for others.
Yes. So it's not just happening like, that's just like instinctual thing that we judge ourselves with our emotions and thoughts and this and that. But it actually, scientifically, is a cognitive error.
Yeah.
That how our cognition somewhat being disabled in that very moment, we lose control of seeing what's real and what's not.
Yeah. Yeah. And often, what's real and what's not is we may see the apparent, right, in the external world, but what's happening, what you see in here, completely different.
Yes.
It's like this out here, but then in here you interpret it this way. This is Maya, right? You start then to misinterpret the reality as, misperception as being a pattern of consciousness in yoga. And then next minute, you're not really seeing the reality as it truly is, and that can be affected by the stream. The stream will, as you mentioned before, you can have an experience of anger, but that experience of anger in the present moment was built on an experience of anger in the past. Someone may have slapped you in the face and you saw someone, warming up for a fight or something like that and they're doing this, and then the next minute for some reason anger arises. You get angry, like, what are they doing that for? Like, so the pre-attentive mind makes the error, as you were saying. The cold cognition makes the error. If we relate it to cognitive science, the pre-attentive mind would be related to the cold cognition. So what actually exists is the mental representation of the idea of self superimposed on the changing mental and physical states. You understand? So that's what actually exists. So that's why it's a mental fabrication, as what you were saying. You're superimposing it onto the changing panorama, not just of the physical reality, but also what's going on within your own mind. And then you have this then sense of self you think. You've constructed it. You've built it. You're basically like a kid on the beach building a sandcastle. But we're the kid building a beach on the sandcastle our whole life.
That's why people say that the life is repeating itself. That's the repeating process. That's how it happens, right?
Yes.
Although we really want to change it,
Yep.
it just repeats itself. Why? Because the storehouse consciousness is too full, overflowing.
Overflowing, yeah. And we all experience that storehouse consciousness to differing degrees, right? Like, for someone who's not spiritually mature or had any training, they will not even know that there is a storehouse consciousness, and they're kind of unconscious with the whole process. As opposed to someone who's an experienced meditator and someone who's a contemplative, or they practice self-inquiry, something like this, they understand their relationship to the storehouse consciousness, or their awareness understands its relationship to the storehouse consciousness. Now, as we explained, the Vijnana and the Samskaras, the stream of consciousness, is a process according to the 5 aggregates, and you think that this is your sense of self, right? So, but then we have to ask ourselves, does this mean that the stream of consciousness is not ours?
Okay.
So now it's yours to the extent that you experience it in your field of consciousness.
Yes.
And that's it. That's the final line about it. It's yours to that degree. But it doesn't really belong to you.
Yeah, just within your field of awareness.
It's within your field of awareness. Something you've accumulated. It's like you went for a long marathon run in the desert, and you're as dusty as hell by the time you get home, But all you need is a good shower and, freshen up to clean all that out.
Yes.
The freshen up here, and in regards to what we're talking about, is abiding more as the awareness and being more observant and not entangling your awareness within the stream of consciousness.
Yes.
That builds this idea of the self that makes you suffer. Then.
Yes. Yes, again, the problem is identification with it as yourself.
As yourself, exactly. It's only you to the extent that you're experiencing it. So a lot of people have to get out of the habit of identifying with the stream of consciousness, as we've mentioned, because as long as you keep that game going, you will continue to suffer, and you will continue to make others suffer because you have those beliefs in that stream.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of the videos that, to be free from this illusion is to dismantle the 5 aggregates.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we dismantle that through the Eightfold Noble Path.
Yes.
We dismantle that through sincere sadhana, That's how we dismantle it. And not, being fooled by the stream.
Yeah.
Not being fooled by the samskaras and alaya vijnana.
Yeah. Not getting tricked by it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, again, even Yogacara school, people will think, oh, well, that's even nihilistic. But it's not. It's not a nihilistic extreme. As Chandrakirti, one of the great Buddhist scholars of the Madhyamaka school, he explained that the self, as we've mentioned constantly through this podcast, is dependently arisen. So it exists dependent on a multitude of causes and conditions. That's how the self exists. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it exists depending on causes and conditions.
Yes.
But it's not permanent.
Not lasting.
Not lasting. It's not something that's intrinsic to you. You borrowed it.
Yes.
And you're a process of it through your life.
And once we are aware of that, we also need to let that go in the stream of consciousness.
Yes.
Instead of holding on to it.
So, is the self an illusion? It is an illusion when we believe it is independent. When we believe it's independent, it's an illusion, because then we act and feel as though we are independent. And we're not. We are a dependent product of certain causes and conditions.
Yes.
The sense of self, I mean, which is completely different than shunyata. But this is a cognitive error and an illusion, right? Our self is dependent. We are, we are not the isolated rational agents that we think we are. We're definitely not. And so the Buddhist conclusion is we need to stop investing in this illusion. And we have to understand that deep down, at our core, we are shunyata. We're
Yes.
empty.
Yeah. So
That's our Buddha nature.
that's right. Good. Yeah. When the strong stream of consciousness comes and goes, it means like things formate within yourself, and once it's gone, it's empty. It's like it's a constant process of that forming and emptying.
Yes.
Yeah. So that again, our true nature is that emptiness, that
Yes.
sunyata.
Shunyata, yeah.
Yeah. And the forming is just that momentary
Yes,
occurrence.
exactly. So the radical corrective to this cognitive error that we need to apply to this illusion is to dismantle, as we said, the 5 aggregates through the Noble Eightfold Path of the Buddha. So, guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.